Today I'm going to be going over a trade I took last week in RIOT. It's a Bitcoin correlation and inefficiency trade that I've been taking really all throughout January as a way of taking advantage of the recent volatility in the Bitcoin space. So I hope you enjoy it. Today I'm going to be going over something called a Bitcoin correlation trade that I was taking last week. I should start off by mentioning that this is really just a scalping strategy that I'm using when Bitcoin is moving really directionally on elevated volume. So in other words, Bitcoin itself should be in play. So one way I'm going to be measuring this is by tracking the net Bitcoin liquidations across exchanges. I'll get into that a little bit more later. But really, when Bitcoin is going through multi-day consolidation, something that's doing right now, the strategy is going to perform pretty poorly. So it's important to know your market when putting on this trade. So essentially, I'm going to be watching the BTC USD chart while also watching the Bitcoin related products. So for me, the vehicles I've been using are RIOT, MARA, and GBTC. And so what I'm looking for is when Bitcoin breaks through an important support or resistance level on an elevated volume, I'm going to be hitting into one of those Bitcoin names that I just listed, looking to catch a sympathy move. So for instance, well, I should say when I'm deciding which one I want to trade, it's a lot of the time just going to come down to the technical setup. So if Bitcoin's selling off, I'll look at those three names I listed and say which one of these is set up best for a technical breakdown. And similarly, if Bitcoin's breaking out, looking at which one is set up best for a technical breakout. And so the whole idea of the trade is that a lot of the times there's a real lag between Bitcoin's price movement and the movement of those vehicles. And sometimes this is even up to 15 to 30 seconds. So I'm really just taking these as scalps. I'm not trying to make a prediction as to where Bitcoin is going. Instead, I'm just taking advantage of this inefficiency that's present with the lag. So yeah, important to keep that in mind. And this strategy also works best in the morning sessions, at least from my experience. The correlative properties with RIOT and MARA especially are highest at the beginning of the day, and then as the day progresses, that somewhat starts to wane.
Let me just provide some context for this, because I think that's a little bit insider baseball for the guys who are listening, but maybe not everybody. So we don't trade. So the products that we have available to trade on our prop desk right now, although this will change shortly, is limited to a GBTC, which is a Bitcoin ETF. We can trade the Bitcoin futures, although you're a little young in your career and you may not have access to the Bitcoin futures yet. And we can trade some of these. I guess there's the Ethereum ETF as well. And we can then trade, which is what you're doing smartly, we can trade other stocks, other listed stocks that are moving in sympathy with Bitcoin, with blockchain, and with the in-playness of cryptocurrencies. And so soon we will have more access to Bitcoin spot, but it's actually pretty hard for prop firms to trade Bitcoin spot, and we've been doing a lot of work and correcting that, but it's actually harder than you think for regulatory reasons, for offering reasons. And so, what you're doing, I'm sure there's going to be people that are sitting there watching this who say, well, why don't you just trade Bitcoin directly? Why don't you trade Bitcoin spot directly? And so I'd like to provide the context for that. The other thing I'd like to do, Graham, which is super interesting, is I'm going to actually be quiet and let you talk actually a little bit more, and I'm going to save my second comment. So I'm going to be quiet, and I'm going to save my second comment for a little bit later.
All right, sounds good. And I am looking forward to trading spot, but it's worth noting that these vehicles I'm trading actually provide an edge outside of just picking the directionality of Bitcoin itself. So there's a separate edge here, even though we are limited in which products we can trade. So anyway, for catalysts, I think most people are aware, but Bitcoin broke through all-time highs of around 20,000 in mid-December.
If I can just not shut up and jump in right here. But it brings a much bigger point into play, which is, sometimes people sit there and they say, oh, I miss Tesla. And they get super frustrated. and they don't take the next step to be like, okay, that sucks that I missed Tesla, but what else will move like Tesla that hasn't moved yet? And I heard you actually doing that today while we were trading, taking the principles that you're going to teach in this particular trade for another sector, and sort of say, hey, can I do that in another sector for something that maybe you missed the primary mover, but hey, how can I get onto the secondary, the third, the tertiary ideas? Definitely going to shut up now. Definitely going to be quiet now for a little bit. So back to you, Graham.
All right. So like I said, Bitcoin broke through 20,000 all-time highs in mid-December. And since then, Bitcoin has just been incredibly strong, with the exception of this past week. It went from 20,000 to around 42,000 within less than a month. And after such an extreme run-up, we had our first significant sell-off on January 10th. And by January 11th, it hit a low of around 30,400. And when Bitcoin is so strong, buyers tend to get really greedy. And so when we get these big sell-offs, they can really go. A lot of longs are offsides. And so this led to a record high value in Bitcoin long liquidations. So just to give a little bit more insight into what this looks like, right here is this 20,000 all-time high from 2017. And so we broke through it on the 16th, and we've just been super strong ever since, until this January 10th sell-off here. And to get a little bit more microscopic with it, this gives a better image as to what was happening. So worth noting that I was trading, and still am actively trading, this strategy kind of around the clock and throughout this entire week. And so on the 11th, when we hit our lows at around 30,400, I was taking advantage of this trade during this time period too. But my best tape and most educational, informative tape, in my opinion, comes from a trade I took for this sell-off here on the following day, the 12th. So that's what we're going to be covering today.
If you want to learn 3 more real-world setups that our traders use, including the simple setup that we teach all of our new traders, and the setup that turned one of our traders into a 7-figure big money earner, check out the free webinar that we're currently running. Just go ahead and click the link that should be appearing now at the top right-hand corner of your screen. That will open up the free registration page in a new window, so don't worry, you won't lose this video. You can also visit tradingworkshop.com to register for this free intensive workshop. You're going to learn more in a couple of hours from this trading workshop than from years of online education.
So just giving an insight into liquidations, this website essentially tracks across all the different Bitcoin exchanges how many different positions got taken out. So for instance, this is it right here, December 16th, when we broke through all-time highs, as you might imagine, there were a lot of shorts positioned against 20,000. So once 20,000 broke, a bunch of short positions were liquidated, and that triggered a pretty big movement to the upside in Bitcoin. And similarly, on the 10th, when when Bitcoin started selling off, we got this record high long liquidation here. And so we're in the aftermath for these trades that I'm taking right now. So really useful, because this will help me know what environments that I'm going to want to be putting this trade on for, because I don't want to be putting on this trade in a choppy environment. So longer term technicals around here, December 16th again, RIOT has been moving in sympathy to Bitcoin's price action. So once Bitcoin broke above 20,000, RIOT has been moving even more so, from $4 up to, a couple days after this trade, hitting almost $30, which is pretty unbelievable. But essentially just following Bitcoin's price action. And then I have the hourly technicals here. And I am looking at this, but it's worth noting that I'm actually more interested in tracking the price action and the levels on Bitcoin than I am about the levels on RIOT. And that might seem sort of counterintuitive, but the thought process is, if the follow through comes about in Bitcoin, RIOT's breakdowns should take care of themselves mostly. So pre-market technicals, this is the close on January 11th, where we made that low at 30,400, and then we got a bit of a bounce in Bitcoin, causing RIOT to bounce up with it until we started selling back and making another leg lower in Bitcoin. So this area here is a lot of where my trading was done. And same idea, I am tracing these levels just as areas where buyers and sellers might step in, but the technicals on Bitcoin are more important to me. All right, so apologies, I know this is a bit ugly, but I think it's the best way that I can convey kind of what I was doing throughout the morning. So I took 3 separate trades in the morning session. So as I showed in the previous slide, Bitcoin was sort of selling off, and this 34,800.
Before we get to that, I do want to ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
I think this is very instructive for other traders that are watching. What has been your best performing product?
RIOT. In January, between RIOT, Mara, and GBTC, I think I've made as much P&L within like 2 weeks as I have in the duration of my past 6 months live with SMB.
All right, great. Yeah, that's terrific. And when I'm reading your daily report card, you are doing a terrific job of noting that this is where you're having the most success. Fair to say?
Definitely.
I just actually got you to commend yourself. I guess I should have been doing the commending, but you're doing a terrific job. Aren't you wonderful? Yes, I am wonderful. You really are doing a terrific job of understanding what you're doing well, understanding the product that you're trading best, and then sticking with it. So you're doing this each day. When I'm reading your daily report card, you're saying things like, I'm having the most success in RIOT and Mara, trading in concert with Bitcoin. My stats are bearing that out. I'm just not making this up. I don't just feel that this is the case. My stats show this, and I'm going to stick with it. And I'm going to focus on being a consistently profitable trader by sticking with what is working best for me. I'm not just now going to swing around and start trading Tesla. I'm going to stick with what's working. You are doing terrific in that regard. Super important to becoming consistently profitable is the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And to get back to the trade management, again, what I'm looking for these trades is important breakthroughs, in this case, breakthrough of support. And so this 34,800 to 35,000 level is a pretty important area that is established over the past couple trading days. And you see in the morning, we make this test here and these lower highs, and eventually we finally break through this zone as the volume starts to step in. And so seeing that, I'm expecting RIOT to follow through. And so that is this short I put on right here. And we get that follow through immediately flushes 40 cents, and I'm covering. Again, this is just a scalp, and that corresponds with this candle right here. We start to kind of consolidate. Bitcoin's trying to decide if it's going to continue lower, and it does. Volume steps back in and we push lower. And so I re-add those shorts right here, and again, cover into this momentum, capturing another 50 to 60 cents here. This corresponds with this green candle here. Get another flush lower that I miss out on, but that's okay. And then, so I don't have the tape from that, so I figured it would be best just to at least show what I was doing in the morning, but I do have the tape from this portion of the trade right here. So coming into the open, Bitcoin gets a bit of a bottoming bounce around 33,200, bounces, and we start pushing lower through this level again. And when this happens, I'm again looking to put a short back on in RIOT here. But you'll see something strange happen, which is while Bitcoin is pushing to new lows, RIOT is actually kind of hanging out here and even begins pushing higher. So I'm already shorting in this zone, but RIOT is continuing to push higher into the open. And I'm fairly sure that the reason for this is that there's a lot of orders coming in at 9:30 and 9:31 of people market longing into RIOT. So all of those orders have to get digested before the correlation can really come back. So instead, what we see is on the open, 9:30, 9:31, RIOT gets a pop even though Bitcoin is pushing back even lower. And so during this period, this is actually the most inefficiently priced shares of the day. So I am looking to build even bigger into this trade here while this inefficiency is so large. And then as RIOT turns over and starts falling to the downside, I am covering on the way down into weakness. Okay, so apologies for the poor graphic quality. I think that'll improve. But you can see I'm already short a decent chunk here. For me, pretty big position size as Bitcoin is pushing lower below 33,200 while RIOT is continuing to push higher. There's the quality. And so I'm not going to have that Bitcoin chart up on the screen this whole trade. But suffice to say that Bitcoin is selling off throughout the duration of at least the first 5 minutes of the open. So as I said, I'm already fairly large into RIOT right now, but I am thinking that I do need to add more if we get a pop on the open. So we are open now. Again, acknowledging that Bitcoin is selling below 33,200, which really should mean that RIOT should be below 2280, its pre-market low. So we're getting a bit of a pop as a bunch of orders are flowing in, the people who are only able to get in at 9:30. And so you see I added some there. And one qualm I have with this trade is that I was already big enough throughout this period that it made me hesitant to add a ton of size throughout here. But the reality is these are the most mispriced shares of the day. So I should be hitting in, I mean, if you can get 2340 to 2350, it's basically all you can eat. You can get as much size as you want, really, as long as you're being responsible with risk management. So a bit uncomfortable in this position, as you might imagine, especially when we get spikes like that. But in reality, again, this is the area where I should be getting even bigger. Bitcoin is still selling off, and now RIOT, I believe, is ready to start following Bitcoin to the downside. And so to cover some of my risk, I end up covering shares on the way down here, which is another issue I have with this trade. It makes sense to cover some risk, but I got a bit overzealous just because I was uncomfortable with how underwater I was with these shares. But now the trade is really starting to work, and you can see why I like this trade so much. RIOT is mispriced up here. Bitcoin is below 33,200. RIOT needs to be following and pushing below pre-market lows. So we've already stuffed over 60 cents from the high of day. But again, the idea is that this should head below 2280, so I don't want to be flat or anything like that. So you can see here, yes, we are having a green candle in Bitcoin, but the real context of it is that we got this push up here and towards the pre-market lows and immediately rejected off of it. So this still is very weak in my eyes. And a little bit of just sitting on my hands here. There is the notion that you could put size on, but I don't think that that is the right idea at this point in the trade. I think the idea is to let the shares that I have ride. And now we're below pre-market lows, and I'm going to be looking to cover a little bit more. So now we're getting closer and closer to a fair pricing of RIOT. So as that happens, I need to be getting out of this position. Again, it's just a scalp to catch this inefficiency that's present in the market off the open.
And Graham, when you're saying now we're at a fair pricing for RIOT, why are you saying that?
Because RIOT's pricing now is more reflective of the price change in the price action of Bitcoin. Whereas here, Bitcoin was at new low of day, whereas RIOT was recovering. This is inefficiently priced, and the value of the company is partly dependent upon the price of Bitcoin, because companies like RIOT have a lot of Bitcoin on their balance sheet. So when Bitcoin's moving directionally like this, RIOT should be moving directionally along with it. So heading even lower, and as we're going, just covering on the way down here. And actually, I end up keeping on too much of this trade. I don't have much left. I started with, well, I'm down to almost 20% of my original position, which I'm happy with. I think by this point in the trade, that's the right idea. But I end up holding on to a little bit of it too long, because you do start to have that concern in the back of your head that Bitcoin has sold off a lot from when it was up here. So at a certain point, it's going to catch a relief bounce. So you want to be on the lookout for that and make sure you're not turning it into an intraday swing, which this trade is not meant to be.
Yeah, the trade is not necessarily Bitcoin. I guess my question is the trade Bitcoin's going to trade lower, or is the trade RIOT should trade lower because it's not in concert where Bitcoin is?
So in general, this trade is Bitcoin is breaking below a key technical level, and I think it'll continue much lower, and the prices I can get in RIOT won't account for the sell-off that's already occurred. So these shares up here are inefficiency shares, but the bigger picture is that I'm getting into RIOT from prices that don't reflect the sell-off that's already happened in Bitcoin. So I am willing to let Bitcoin sell off further. I don't think it's just going to sell off 100 points. I think it could sell off 500 or more. So I want to be able to capture that from good prices, but I'm not trying to make a prediction as to where I think Bitcoin will be in an hour.
Well, I think that's going to help you decide whether or not to cover them, to fully cover. You know, is part of this a swing, which you're going to sort of need to see Bitcoin turn around, stop going down, or is it all just an inefficiency play for which that spike down is probably going to get you to cover because it's more towards par for what you think it should be trading at relative to Bitcoin.
Right. Yeah, and that's why I've covered the majority of the position. I'm now down to exactly 20% of the original position size. But just looking at how weak this is right now, and given the fact that I think RIOT lags behind Bitcoin a decent bit, I think that there should be continuation to the downside, at least a little bit in RIOT, to account for essentially this price action where we're continuing to make new lows. But in general, I do agree. I think that this is probably the point in the trade where I need to just be looking to get flat. So you see I put an order out there for another little chunk of the position. Gets filled, and I believe I take one more cover in here. Which gets filled right there. But from this point on, it's about 15% of the position, I am mismanaging, and I'm treating it as a swing, which it's not meant to be. And so I am going to fast forward the tape a decent bit, because essentially what we see is Bitcoin starts to bottom out. And I think the thought process I had in mind is that we have this 33,200 level that we broke down from. With this last 15%, I'll just see if Bitcoin starts to hold back above that level, I'll get out of the trade. But that's a different trade strategy. So this last 15% is mismanaged.
When you have something that's been so strong on a longer term chart, when something breaks down on a shorter term technical level, you want to be suspicious for some value buying that comes in. So, if we dip below a technical support level on our shorter term, but our longer term is really strong, and we start to see some value buying, we start to see the stock or the product not get below a certain price, we need to be suspicious of that, hey, people are stepping in here to buy, even though it's below my dopey technical short-term level, because the longer term charts and technicals are up.
Right. And For context, I think part of the reason that I was doing this is because it is, in a sense, strong on a higher time frame level. But I am keeping in mind that we just sold off 25% from all-time highs, more than 25% from 42,000. And so there was the indication across a bunch of traders that maybe 30,400 wasn't the low, and we end up selling off below 30,000. But that's a much more speculative idea, and it's not really the idea of this trade. But I'll just zoom in here to the end because it's not the most informative tape from this point on. Eventually we get back above 22 and I hit out of the final portion of my position here. Still in the profit, but not nearly as much as they were. So worth keeping in mind, TraderView doesn't show the pre-market executions. So it doesn't show essentially a short up here, a cover down here, a reshort here, a cover down here, and then my shorts from around 23.10 coming into the open. But these show my ads up here and then my covers on the way down, as well as these last covers right here for the final 15%. But this is just one trade. So I figured I'd show just what my executions look like across a day, because I'm taking these as scalps and I'm taking a lot of them throughout the day. Particularly last week, it was super active. And so while these scalps might not look like much, this day, January 11th, was actually my biggest P&L day to date, and this RIOT trading was a big portion of that. So these scalps can really add up quite quickly, especially when you have this edge on your side and feel like you can size in.
Yeah, and I'll just say, awesome, terrific. And they absolutely can add up really quickly. I'll just say one thing about people cutting their teeth trading cryptocurrencies. Lots of people are opening up accounts, trading for the first time using Bitcoin, Ethereum, and some of the other cryptocurrencies. People see themselves as only cryptocurrency traders. You want to think about how can my question to people like that is, are you really only a cryptocurrencies trader? You may see yourself as only a cryptocurrencies trader. You may only be interested in sort of the fundamentals that drive the interest in cryptocurrencies. But what you're doing, if you're doing this well, in your case scalping, or maybe some other people are momentum trading, or maybe some other people in the space are trading with technicals, you are learning how to trade. And your quest could be, how do I do what I'm doing in cryptocurrencies in other products that are acting like this, that are setting up like cryptocurrencies? And as much as cryptocurrencies has doubled and had an enormous and amazing run from 20,000 to 40,000 to 30,000 to 40,000, there are stocks that are moving much more. And we see stocks they don't just double, they go up even more. And so if your foray into trading is cryptocurrencies, there's a big world out there, and you may be doing some awesome trading in cryptocurrencies that you can apply to other stocks. And as always, control your risk, like you mentioned at the beginning. So I see that often where people limit the work that they're doing. And you too, you as well, Graham. Great that you're having so much success, and keep with it with the names you're doing really well in, but you'll be able to trade other products really well as well, doing the similar type of work.
Yeah, definitely. And that's one thing that I'm kind of taking a little solace in, is that I know that I can apply this to other trading vehicles. And for the most part, I'm not the world's greatest scalper by any means. So this has been a really nice kind of learning tool for me that I think I'm going to be able to apply to other stuff down the road.
Yeah, usually people aren't the world's greatest scalpers and things that they shouldn't be scalping. So we say this a lot. You're only as good as the stocks you trade. The stocks that you choose to trade is as important, if not more, than how you trade. And so you probably are doing scalping in vehicles and products and stocks that are hard to scalp. But if you limited and we're more selective and you're scalping, you're showing here you can scalp. The answer is probably being super selective in the other stocks that you are trying to scalp.
Right. And it comes down to having like a defined understanding of what the scalp looks like. So that's why something like this has been super important for me, because I have a better clarity for what a scalp should look like, at least in this strategy.
I would say that I would surmise that if you were trying to scalp the EV sector over the last 2 weeks, you'd probably do pretty well too.
Right. And so I'm trying to dip my toe into that area as well, just broadening out. But as to what to improve in this trade here, my main issue was just the trade management with regards to risk aversion. So at the peak, I was risking almost half of my stop on the idea. And so that's quite high for me. But I'm spotting what I consider to be an A+ inefficiency trade for me that I think most market participants are missing. And so it's warranted taking that kind of risk. And so when RIOT has so much catching up to do to the downside, the reward is very high on the trade. And so I kind of owe it to myself to be building and utilizing the risk that I have at my disposal. And so once RIOT begins turning over and following Bitcoin to the downside, I do think from a risk management perspective, it makes plenty of sense to cover some risk, covering into that like 2280 to 23 pre-market support zone. But the real idea of the trade is that RIOT should be heading quite a bit lower. So in this trade, by the time RIOT was at pre-market lows, I was already down to 40% of my position, which is just way too small. Like being uncomfortable with that initial unrealized loss I had at the peak, it caused me to miss out on at least 50% of P&L upside, if not more. So that's my biggest area that I'm looking at and trying to improve on with these trades. But yeah, that's about it for this. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I think right there, what you needed to do on the spike higher is look for that turn on the spike higher and see the turn and trade off the turn and keep your stop pretty tight. So if you're starting sort of an inefficiency trade and it goes against you, it's actually better that it goes against you because the inefficiency is getting greater,
right,
as you noted. And so the way to control your risk and to put yourself in a chance to make even more money is use your tape reading skills. So you let it spike back up to a level that's not sustainable based on your technical and chart reading skills. And then you hone in on your tape reading skills and you wait for the turn. You see the buyers stop, you see the sellers in control, and you hit it hard with a really tight stop against the high of that spike. And then into the down move, you take some profits, and then you sort of double up your position at a minimum. You hold a bigger swing trade, catch-up trade, whatever you want to call it, and that's how you handle that. So that's not doubling down. That's making a second trade inside of a bigger trade. That hitting it hard when it turns is a second trade with a really tight stop. That'll work really nicely, particularly in a stock or product that's liquid. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. And going over the tape, there is like kind of a specific moment where it's pretty obvious that all the buyers that are market buying directly off the open, those have all been exhausted, and RIOT begins to start turning over.
Graham, I think that's when you see that, I think that's your tier one, and you're marked against the position because it's spiking against you. And then I think on the turn, it's tier four. And I think you scalp out of 2 tiers. I think you're up to tier 2, and you now put yourself in a better position in your swing trade. You make some cash flow on a couple of tiers. You more than pay for the trade, and then you sit in it. That's an example of trading. Like that's what traders do. You've taken an idea and you've given yourself a call option to either make some money or make a lot of money. That's trading when you think of it that way.
Hey, go ahead and click our subscribe button so you don't miss any of the videos that we're producing for you in the trading community. And please take the time to add your feedback in the comments section for what videos you'd like for us to produce next and what you found helpful from this video. From all of us at SMB, train and trade well.